right, here we go. Welcome, class, to Classics 160, B1. Meet the Ancients! And today's lecture on finishing up ancient Egypt, I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and what we are doing today is talking through the rest of Egyptian history, right? So where we left off last time was with the Old Kingdom, and what we're going to be doing now is moving into the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and the rest of Egyptian history afterwards. So let's go ahead and let's turn down the lights and get the projector going. My dog over here is really enjoying this lecture so far. And today we are going to tackle lecture 3.1, Egypt as Empire. What do you think about that, Ruby? Is that a good lecture topic for today? You want to come over here? Come on. Come on. Now, she doesn't want to come on TV. She just wants to play, I think. Ruby, this is my job. I have to do this. So Ruby is my dog, and she is she's at least half pit bull and half something else. They said dachshund, which would be like a little tiny dog, but she's not a little tiny dog. She's kind of big, so we don't know. We did one of the doggy DNA tests, so we're waiting for the results right now. Come here, Ruby. Come on. No, she just wants to play. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive in and see what we have for today. Okay, we are going to start with announcements as we usually do, and then we are going to recap what we talked about last time with the early days of ancient Egypt. After we move out of the Old Kingdom, right, the age of the pyramids, we're going to move into the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom and talk about some of the different ways that especially the pharaohs legitimized their political power in ancient Egypt. So let's go ahead and see what we got in terms of announcements today. All right, you guys know the basics now, right? Put the thing into speaker view. You can see me, you can see the slides, you can see the text, the images, the words, everything there. If you have a question, please direct that to your TA. They will go ahead and do their best to answer you. If not, they'll funnel the questions to me, and I'll try to answer them when we're going through our. Oh, there she is. All right, come on, Ruby. Up we go. There we go. All right, so this is my dog, Ruby. Ruby, you gotta say hi. Say hi. Anyway, she is a sweetheart. And her mom right now is out on a run, which is why she really has a COVID time complex where she's just used to us being around all the time. And so she has some separation anxiety. Anyway, where was I? Okay, announcements. Honors contract information. It is up on D2L for real now, all right? What I would like you guys to do, you've got about 10 days until you need to submit that. The link is on D2L. If it's applicable to you, go ahead and take a look at it. And what we're going to do is on Friday, for the rest of the class, I'm going to let you guys out a little bit early. For students who are interested in the honors project, go ahead and stick around on Friday and we'll talk through it. And I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what the virtual reality aspect or component to that is going to be. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get back to the gift of the Nile, right? Ancient Egypt and where we started last time. Remember, we started with this ancient Egyptian historian, this guy by the name of Manetho, who's kind of half Greek, half Egyptian, and he's the guy who first groups Egyptian history into what we call dynasties, right? Series of rulers from the same family. And then what modern historians or modern Egyptologists have done is group those dynasties into two different things. So we've got kingdoms, which are periods of strong centralized rule by the pharaoh, right? The Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom. And then we've got intermediate periods, which are these periods of kind of weaker, more dispersed rule, periods of invasion, periods of instability, all right? And we're going to talk through some of those today. Now, what we saw is that in the earliest days of ancient Egypt, around 3000 BC, right at the same time that the Sumerians are getting going over in Mesopotamia. Egypt is originally divided into two different areas, right? So up here in the top, in the north, we've actually got Lower Egypt. And then down here in the south, near the bend in the Nile River, we've got Upper Egypt. And originally, those are ruled and governed by two different political entities. And one of the artifacts that we saw that shows this kind of separate rule is known as the Scorpion Mace Head. And we've got King Scorpion here, right? And when you look at the drawing, you can maybe kind of sort of see the little scorpion next to his head. What he's holding, right, is an irrigation tool, right? And so that's one of the reasons why when we discuss the causes of increased political hierarchy, we see irrigation and the organization of large labor projects as one of the main causal factors in that process. So even though he's also the subject of a movie starring The Rock, he is really actually a historical figure of some political importance. Okay, after that, right, we looked at the Narmer palette over here. And out of all the artifacts dealing with the unification of Egypt, this is the most important one, all right? And so we've got King Narmer, and you can tell his name. It's in this little box up here. It's a catfish and chisel. That's how you say Narmer in ancient Egyptian. And on the front of it, we can see the king with the crown of Upper Egypt smiting his foe. We can see Lower Egyptians stylized here with reeds from the Nile Delta coming out of their back. And then Horus, the hawk or falcon god of kingship, kind of subduing him. And then on the back of this thing, what we see is the king up here in the top register. Now he's wearing the curly Q crown, the red crown of Lower Egypt. We've got his name next to him right there. And then we've got these two mythical beasts. They call them sometimes serpopards, right? So half serpent, half leopard. And they've got these extended necks here. And it's actually the little central area. That's where the grinding of minerals actually would have occurred, right? But the entanglement of the two necks, that's one of the kind of symbols on here that makes scholars think they are seeing some sort of symbolic iconography dealing with the unification of Egypt. Now, there's a lot of debate of this, right? And when you read about this artifact, some scholars think, hey, what we're witnessing is the actual process of unification here. Other scholars end up thinking that what we're witnessing is basically somebody who already has power and is basically kind of calling back to some previous time. Either way, when it comes to the unification of Egypt, the Narmer palette sticks out as one of the most important artifacts we've got. Now, we also saw that during what's called the early dynastic period, dynasties 1 and 2, things were crazy, all right? So there was like human sacrifice going on. When the king died, he would have all his servants killed with him, right? Sacrificed and buried along with him here so that they could serve him in the afterlife. And pretty soon people realized that being the servant to the king was a terrible job, and nobody wanted to do that. And so instead what they did is they started burying the king with these little statuettes of servants so that they could then kind of come to life and still help him in the afterlife without needing to kill 100 to 200 other people along with them. All right, so those are known as ushabtis, and they're a very prevalent artifact in the ancient world. Okay, so we saw with the Old Kingdom, right, that this is the age of the pyramids. And this is one of the wild things about ancient Egypt is that, I mean, definitely, for sure, right, Egypt is the most iconographic thing is the pyramid, right? And yet it goes back to the earliest kind of stage of Egyptian history, right? This is 1,000 years or more before anything of kind of monumental substance is going on in the Greek world, right? So it really is early compared to what's going on elsewhere. And what we saw with the pyramids, right, these are very literally like houses for the dead, right? They're tombs for the kings, they're houses for the afterlife, and we can see the evolution. So very early on, they start as mastaba tombs, and what those are, they're representations of the primordial mound. So if you learn more about ancient Egypt, if you learn more about ancient Egypt, what you'll see is that all the gods originally kind of arise out of this what they call the primordial mound. And this is the first piece of land that kind of existed after these original floodwaters subsided, right? So their kind of mythology is very much tied to something like the flood of the Nile. And then what we end up getting relatively early on in the third dynasty is the pharaoh Djoser ends up stacking one mastaba tomb on top of another. So he puts one on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, and we've got the world's first pyramid, right? So that's the step pyramid of the pharaoh Djoser. You don't need to remember the name there. Just remember that that's still pretty early on. Then in the fourth dynasty, we get guys really playing around with the style and shape of pyramids. So the pharaoh Snefru, right, he starts out building this thing, realizes it's not going to work, and he has to change the angle. He builds another one that collapses in on it. He finally gets it right with the third one. And eventually he's got a good, solid, kind of true pyramid. And then it's during that dynasty, later in the fourth dynasty, with the pyramids of Giza, that we get the pinnacle, right, the apex of pyramid building in ancient Egypt, dating to around 2500 BC. So kind of, I know there are a lot of dates on here. Write down 2500 BC as kind of like a rough date for the peak of the pyramids. And again, the reason that's important is not so much because the date itself is that important, but the idea that it's so much earlier than what's going on in other parts of the Mediterranean world is very notable. And one of the things we saw with the pyramids last time, right? These are just one part of a larger complex where the pharaoh or the king would live for eternity, right? After they die. And so there are temples along with it. There's a temple near the Nile River Valley. There's a temple near the pyramid itself. There's a little house for the statue of the soul of the pharaoh. There are little subsidiary pyramids for the wives of the pharaoh. There are other tombs for nobles. There's a whole like workers complex for the people who built the pyramids. So when you see the pictures, right, it's often the solitary pyramid standing out there. But in antiquity, it would have been a very lively place with lots of things going on, lots of building, lots of worshiping of the dead king. And we can take a look inside. This is the Great Pyramid of the Pharaoh Khufu, and see just how refined the architecture is on the interior of this. So this is known as corbelled vaulting, where they stack stones just very slightly inward until they get all the way to the top there. And then there's a lintel stone overlying the whole top. And that leads to the burial chambers. There's one both for the king and for a queen there inside the pyramid of Khufu. Now, one of the things that you'll see here, right, is that these are very empty, okay? And that's kind of sort of how Egyptologists and archaeologists found them when they were first excavated, all right? And what that kind of means is that these things were all looted in antiquity, all right? So when you see the pyramids, they really originally would have had rich grave goods interred with them, but it didn't take very long for other people to realize that like the pyramid itself was like a giant billboard saying, hey, lots of very valuable stuff in here, come and loot me. And so that ended up happening. And that's why when we get later into this lecture and we start talking about King Tut, that's why that discovery was so monumentally important. Okay, now the age of the pyramids in the Old Kingdom comes to an end in the 6th dynasty, or after the 6th dynasty, after the reign of a pharaoh known as Pepi II. All right? Now, Pepi II is notable for his incredibly long reign. As far as I know, there has been nobody in the history of people who has ever held a kingship for as long as Pepi II. He came to the throne when he was 6 years old, and he died when he was 100. All right? And along the way, one of the reasons this had like kind of brought about the end of the Old Kingdom is that all the legitimate heirs to the throne, right? His children and nephews and that sort of thing, they all died before he did. And along the way, what that meant is he starts giving out more and more power away from his kind of biological family to different regional rulers, right? And kind of the resulting factor of that, or the result of that, is that different regions of Egypt become more powerful. And after Pepi II dies, they basically say, we don't feel like dealing with the central pharaoh anymore. We're just going to do our own regional thing. So that brings about the end of the Old Kingdom. They go through a couple hundred years of kind of unstable, decentralized rule. And then eventually they get things back together in what we call the Middle Kingdom. So the Middle Kingdom starts around 2000 BC, ends around 1600, a little bit before that. And what you're looking at over here, right, on the kind of left-hand side here, pyramids don't disappear totally, but take a look at like what a Middle Kingdom pyramid looks like. All right? It is not particularly impressive. Okay? I mean, we can go back and look at like, I mean, the pyramid of the Old Kingdom, the pyramids of the Old Kingdom are monumental. They're built of stone. They have lasted for 4,500 years. By the Middle Kingdom, like they're made out of mud brick. They kind of melt away when it rains. Not much to write home about. Okay, so one of the things that's going on here is that the pharaohs themselves are changing the way that they portray themselves and their relationship to their people. So very literally, in the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs are portraying themselves as divine gods, right? They're not just the son of a god, they are gods themselves. By the Middle Kingdom, they're not getting rid of that divinity. They're still divine gods, but they're emphasizing different attributes of their power, okay? And so we can see a statuette here of one of the Middle Kingdom pharaohs, Senusret I, and the way he's portraying himself is very literally as the shepherd of the people, right? He's got the shepherd's crook, and he is kind of like a shepherd, and the people are his flock. And what he's doing is emphasizing his role of taking care of his people. So it's not so much this distant godlike figure of the Old Kingdom. Now we're looking at somebody who's taking care and laboring on behalf of his people. And we can see this in the way that they portray themselves iconographically as well. All right? So when you look at the statues of the Old Kingdom, I should have put one up here as a comparison, but they kind of sort of look like this, right? They got headdresses and that sort of thing, but the style of the face is very different. It doesn't matter how old they are, right? They could be 100 years old like Pepi II. They're still going to look like they're 20 years old and smiling. When you get to the Middle Kingdom, that changes slightly. So instead of emphasizing this idealized eternal youth, they're now emphasizing kind of the stress and the toll that being the pharaoh takes on them, right? It's hard to care for all these people. It's hard to care for your people. And you want to show that on the different visual representations of you. And so you can see two statue fragments here of Amenhotep III, say that 3 times fast. And what we can see, he's got exaggerated ears, right? This is so that he can hear the problems of the people. You can see kind of different lines on the face, kind of like lines of age almost, right? It's no longer a smiling expression anymore, right? It's kind of like a more severe style, either frown or just kind of a severe, serious look. But the interpretation here is that pharaohs are portraying themselves as though, they want to show the people how much work they're putting in on behalf of their constituency. Now, when it comes to art in the kind of non-royal sphere, the Middle Kingdom is super cool because we get tons of these little wooden models, almost, right? You think of like a toy model, it kind of looks like that, about daily life. So we have several tombs that have lots of these. And what you're looking at here is actually a model of a bakery and a brewery here, right? So they're kneading bread, they're pouring beer. Beer was hugely influential and important in ancient Egypt. It actually was frequently used as a form of payment for things like building the pyramids. It's different than like beer today. Think of it almost more like a smoothie is kind of the wrong word, but it's much thicker, right? It's not this kind of like clear kind of thing like a Bud Light or something. And it would have a lot of nutrients other than just the alcohol, and people of all ages would have drank this thing. So yeah, what we're looking at here is a model of a bakery and a brewery, and it's representative of a lot of artifacts that we have that show us what daily life in Egypt was actually like. One of the other cool things about the Middle Kingdom is that literature flourishes. So when we look at the Old Kingdom, we can think of it as like the pharaoh chiseling in like accomplishments. When you look at the inside of the later pyramids of the Old Kingdom, you get different spells so that the pharaoh can successfully get to the afterlife. But the writing of the Old Kingdom is very much focused on the pharaoh and the gods. When we get to the Middle Kingdom, we get a totally different type of literature. All of a sudden, people are writing about like real people's problems. And if you ever get a chance to take a class on like Middle Kingdom literature, do it. It's fascinating stuff. So we have one thing, or one text called The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant. And this is a story about a regular peasant who gets accused of stealing a rich guy's like flock of sheep or something like that. And I forget exactly what he steals. Maybe it's some grain. But the rich guy takes him to trial and puts him in front of the judge. And the peasant is such a beautiful, beautiful speaker that the judge like doesn't want to let him go or render a judgment. And so day after day, the peasant gets up there and tells his story. And the judge just says, "That's very interesting. Please come back tomorrow and tell me more." And this happens day after day after day after day. And eventually, after like 2 weeks of this, he finally gets the judge to like render a verdict. And I'll let you guys figure out what the verdict is if you ever read this on your own. But what this is doing, right, is it's kind of exemplifying the difficulties of the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder, right? The difficulties of it being a relatively poor person in ancient Egypt. And that's the kind of thing that just didn't exist previously in the Old Kingdom. Another example we have is a text called The Dispute or the Debate Between a Man and His Ba. And a Ba in ancient Egypt, that's a kind of part of your soul. And basically the man is just sick of life, right? He's just like, work is hard, gotta pay all these taxes, do more work. It's just like, what's the point, right? Like, I'm looking at these like pyramids and stuff. The afterlife looks great. Like, I wish things were just over and I could get to the afterlife. And the Ba, or his spirit, is like, well, the afterlife is pretty great, but there's no rush to get there, right? Like, you need to seek out a little bit more enjoyment in some of the nicer things in your own life and not be in any rush to get to the afterlife. And the debate goes on and on and on, eventually with the Ba kind of having the last word, saying like, look, your logic isn't terrible. The afterlife is pretty sweet, but there's no rush to get there. Take your time enjoy the life that you do have. And so again, what we end up seeing with this is a real focus on like real world everyday problems of kind of everyday people, which again is a vast departure from what we saw in the Old Kingdom. One of the other things that we end up getting in the Middle Kingdom is a much stronger emphasis on the god Osiris, all right? And so if you guys are digging Egypt, right, and you want to learn more about this, I teach another, it's actually a 150 level gen ed class. So it's 150, I think it's C1, called Pyramids and Mummies. And we look at the role of the pharaoh in ancient Egyptian society. And we'll look more at religion as a way to legitimize rule by the pharaohs. So look at that for a deeper kind of look into all this. I'll be offering it over the summer. But Osiris is one of these early gods, and it's during the Middle Kingdom that he really comes to prominence. And the story of Osiris is that originally he is like the king of kind of the king of men, king of gods. He's the ruling god on earth, basically. But he's got this brother by the name of Seth or Set. And his younger brother Set was always kind of jealous that his older brother got to be king. And so he invites him to a party, right? And after Osiris has a little bit of beer to drink, he says like, hey, I was gonna build a coffin for you, right? So that you have this beautiful coffin for your afterlife if you ever die. But I wanna make sure that it's sized correctly. So could you just get in the coffin just so I can, finish off the measurements? And I imagine you guys know what's going to happen from here, right? As soon as he gets in, Set nails the thing shut and he floats it down the river. And then later on, he gets it out of the river and he actually chops up Osiris. He chops up Osiris into 14 different pieces. And then he scatters those pieces all over Egypt. Now, it's the sister of Osiris, a deity by the name of Isis, who's actually also like the wife of Osiris. Like, relationships are weird amongst the gods, both in Egyptian and Greek mythology. But it's the sister wife of Osiris by the name of Isis who goes around Egypt, right? Goes around searching and picks up all the different pieces of Osiris and puts him back together. And then wraps him up, right? This is where we get the origins of mummification. And then puts some kind of spell on him and he comes back to life. And as he's kind of coming back to life, Isis and Osiris, they also mate with each other. And they have a kid by the name of Horus. And Horus becomes the god of kingship on the kind of actual real world, whereas Osiris becomes the god of the underworld. And that's why Osiris, you always see him depicted in tombs because he's the god of the underworld. And it's their kid, Horus, who becomes the god kind of the overworld. He fights with Set and eventually destroys him. And again, through this story, we're also getting kind of a justification for the origins of the mummification process. Okay, so the story of Osiris has nothing to do with Heracles, but I bet Heracles would have thought it was pretty cool. So go ahead and take a couple minutes now and go over to D2L, quizzes, quiz 3, January 25th, and choose pink. Pink is the answer. I know it kind of looks purple. It's not purple. It's pink. Pink is the answer today, not purple. All right, and I'll try to tackle a couple questions from the chat while you guys are doing that. We are recording today, so just to give you guys a sense, the way I do this is I record locally on my computer to get a little bit of a higher resolution. And then I do a little bit of post-processing and fix the audio a little bit before I upload it to YouTube. Is the exam open or closed book? So the exam, and if I don't have this on there, let me know and I'll make sure to change it on D2L. The exam is going to be open note and open book, all right? But it is going to be timed. And we'll talk more about this as we get closer to it. But what that's going to mean is that if you have to go look up every answer in your notes, I mean, you can go back to the lectures and look at those too. But if you have to do that for every question, you're going to really struggle to finish it. If you have well-organized notes and you've studied them, and you know some of the answers just by, off the top of your head, you look up a few, you're going to be in much better shape, okay? So it's open note and open book, but it is going to be timed. You're going to have 50 minutes to do, I think it's 20 multiple choice, 20 or 25 multiple choice, and one essay, right? Would sacrifice have been considered an honor? Absolutely. So this was going back to the sacrifice of the early dynastic period. It definitely would have been considered an honor. Nevertheless, I think that, this is all conjecture, but I think it would have been difficult to get people excited about the sacrifice process, even if it was an honor and they were telling you you were going to live forever in eternity. Does Ruby have her own Instagram account? No, she does not. I will see what I can do about that. Somebody asked about intact pyramids. So in terms of pyramids, we don't have any that haven't been looted, all right? And what we're going to see actually when we move to the New Kingdom right after this is that one of the things that happens is that the Egyptians themselves realized that building a giant pyramid is an easy way to get things looted. And so instead, maybe you should not be so conspicuous with where you bury your royalty. And even though most of those tombs got looted too, there were a couple, and one in particular that didn't get looted in antiquity. Oh, somebody asked about D2L, where everything's located. So right now what I'm doing is I'm posting just the lectures and not the PowerPoints, because I'd like you to actually kind of listen to this if you need to take notes. And they're going to be found under content and then whatever the day it is, right? So if you missed lecture on January 22nd, go there and you can always find the lecture, watch through it, take notes, that sort of thing. All right, let's get to it. Are booby traps real? I got to tackle that question first. So in the Old Kingdom, not so much. In the Middle Kingdom, there is like one or two of the pharaohs who do start like building like trap doors and stuff inside their pyramids. And we have one that the pharaoh didn't actually end up getting buried in this pyramid, but the archaeologists have gotten inside and seen these different sorts of trap doors where you go through something and then like sand comes down and like lets down a block. It's pretty cool stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the New Kingdom. So before we get there, the end of the Middle Kingdom comes with what's called the Second Intermediate Period. And again, this is a period of instability. And what we end up seeing here is an actual invasion, right? It's hard to invade Egypt, but it happens around 1650 BC. And it's this group known as the Hyksos. And they're from the Levant, right? So the area of like Israel, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, that kind of region. And they're swooping down in like kind of through the Sinai into Egypt. And they're bringing something very important with them. They're bringing war chariots. And up until this point, Egypt had never seen war chariots, right? So those were an invention of the Hittites. Kind of through the Hittites, they become popular in the area of the Levant. And then the Hyksos bring them down into Egypt. And we actually have remains from the kind of final few battles between the Egyptians and the Hyksos before like the Egyptians are able to reestablish control. And this is one of the royal Egyptian mummies, a guy by the name of Sekenenre Tau. And we can actually see that he's gotten himself a Hyksos-style battle axe to the head up here, and then another blow from like a mace or something. So pretty grisly stuff. It's not often where a pharaoh actually gets killed in battle, but we can see that here. But eventually the Egyptians win, and they usher in what we call the New Kingdom. Now, the New Kingdom lasts from around 1500 to around 1100 BC. It's dynasties 18 to 20. Again, you don't need to really remember the dynasty numbers. But do remember, this is the age of imperialism for Egypt. And what I mean by that is that this is the time where Egypt kind of, for 1,500 years, Egypt has occupied the same space, right along the Nile River Valley in the Delta. And now finally what they're doing is they're expanding out beyond that, farther south into the Sudan, into modern day Sudan, and then farther north and east into the Levant, eventually bumping up against the Hyksos. And so we can see that here. Normally, I know this is a kind of small little map here, but normally you could imagine a boundary being drawn there, right? They don't really get into the Sinai. A boundary drawn there. They don't really get over into Libya. And a boundary drawn where we see the green land here, or the green line here. That's about as far south as they go. But during the New Kingdom, these pharaohs end up pushing further and further and further into these other territories, right? Making it all the way up here, bumping up against the Hittites, making it all the way down south here into modern day Sudan, what we'd call ancient Nubia, making it all the way west into Libya. One of the other interesting things we get during the New Kingdom is we get our first, this is actually debated, but we get our first very strong female pharaoh. And this is happening right around 1500 BC. Her name's Hatshepsut. And one of the cool things here is that we can see her grapple with how to legitimize power. And so sometimes she depicts herself like a classic king, right? Like unless you could read the hieroglyphs, you would just think this is a traditional male pharaoh, right? So she's giving some kind of nod to the traditional way of justifying kingship. Other times, she's very clearly portraying herself as a female pharaoh. And so you can kind of see the exaggerated breasts here, the more feminine face, very clearly like not trying to cover up the fact that she is a woman leading Egypt. One of the awesome things here is that this isn't like some weird period of like hardship where somehow like a female has like found their way to the throne and they're just trying to hold on. This is like one of Egypt's most powerful like periods, right? It's her and a couple other kings where they are thriving, right? She is expanding different social programs for the people. She's expanding power politically. She's strengthening the military. All signs are pointing to the fact that Egypt is thriving under the rule of Hatshepsut. And one of the coolest things, right, is that she is also like building herself an awesome funerary monument. So remember, I was talking about looting earlier on, right? And what ends up happening is that the pharaohs decide a good strategy is to actually hide the burial chamber, right? Go hide that underground somewhere. And then separate that out from the funerary temple. So the funerary temple is still going to be where the pharaoh is worshipped after their death. But the actual tomb is going to be hidden. And one of, if not the most famous funerary temple in Egypt today is the funerary temple of Hatshepsut at a site called Deir el-Bahri down in the south near Thebes or modern day Luxor. And it's been a little bit reconstructed here, but it's not all kind of reconstruction. But it's so cool. I mean, it looks so modern in its construction here, right? On 3 different levels, and then you got statues of Osiris and the Queen as you move up into the 2nd level here, and it's just exemplifying this separation of the worship of the deceased from the actual tomb of the deceased pharaoh. Ruby really likes the Temple of Hatshepsut. Now, this also goes to a larger thing that's going on, right? During the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs are putting a lot of their resources and labor into things like the pyramids. During the New Kingdom, a lot of that money and labor is going into temples to the gods rather than tombs for the king. So the temples of Amun at Karnak and Luxor, these are 2 of the biggest in all of ancient Egypt. And so you can see the remains of some of those here. These are down in the southern part of the country. They're monumentally large. If you take the Temple of Karnak, you could put like 3 or 4 cathedrals of Notre Dame inside the footprint of the Temple of Karnak. I mean, it's just absolutely massive. Here you can see another one of Luxor here with the papyrus reeds. And then, in the middle of all of this, right, Egypt is flourishing, and then things get crazy. All right, so we get this pharaoh, Amenhotep IV, right? He's the fourth Amenhotep. There was a 1, 2, and 3. 3 was very, very powerful. And Amenhotep IV starts his reign just like any other pharaoh. And somewhere in the middle, he decides he's going to change it all. And so what he ends up doing is he starts changing. The big change is religious. And he says all those other ones, Amun, Osiris, they're not a big deal anymore. In fact, I'm going to disband the priesthoods of all those. And instead, everybody is going to worship the Aten, right? So the Aten is what you see over here, right? It's known as the sun disk. And it's got these little like rays of the sun ending in little hands that give out ankhs, the symbol of life. So he changes religion. Everybody now worships the Aten. He changes the way that pharaohs are portrayed, right? In the New Kingdom, it goes back to this idealized style. But under Akhenaten, all of a sudden, he's like portrayed with his family. There's all this movement. He's got his little kids here. The portrayal of the body ends up becoming very elongated face, like protruding hips. And so really changing the way that pharaohs are viewed. And then he also changes the capital city as well. So up until this point, there were capitals in the north, right, near Memphis and Giza. There were capitals in the south, down near Thebes, and this is where Karnak and Luxor is, down here. And he decides, I'm going to stick this thing right in the middle of the country. So he builds an entirely new capital city at the site of Amarna in the middle of the country from scratch. Still a super cool site to see today. He's also very prominent and prevalent with the portrayal of his wife, Nefertiti, right? And the bust of Nefertiti, which you see over here, this is like undoubtedly one of the most famous single sculptures from Egyptian antiquity. In large part because it seems like a very, it's idealized to some extent, but it also seems very realistic, right? Compared to a lot of the kind of Old Kingdom sculptures that you see. Now, you got to think about this a little bit from the perspective of the rest of the country, right? Or maybe country is the wrong word, but the rest of the Nile River Valley and the priesthoods and the people. We're talking 1,600 years now. People had worshipped the standard kind of pantheon of gods. And sometimes new ones kind of rose to power and they'd come in there and enter the pantheon. Sometimes older ones would diminish in terms of importance. But they'd been there for 1,600 years. And now Akhenaten was saying, no more. You only worship the Aten. And so this doesn't go over well, right? When Akhenaten dies, basically the old priesthoods of Amun revolt, and they try to take back power. And it's the son of Akhenaten, a guy you guys might know as King Tut, who actually starts that process of trying to re-normalize Egyptian religion and kind of political culture as well. So he moves the capital from Amarna back to Thebes, and then he starts actually re-initiating the cult to Amun and the other gods of the traditional Egyptian pantheon. So his name, actually, an interesting kind of point here. Originally, before his dad died, he was Tutankhaten, named after the Aten. And then after his dad dies, he changes his name to Tutankhamun, right? The beloved of Amun. And then moves the capital back to Thebes. So politically speaking, this is why King Tut's important, right? He is the guy who kind of moves Egypt back to a traditional religious culture. But archaeologically, he's important because there is kind of sort of one or two other ones that are much, much smaller. But this is the most important unlooted royal tomb in ancient Egypt. And so this thing was discovered in 1922 by the archaeologist and Egyptologist Howard Carter in the Valley of the Kings. And this is where pharaohs had been burying themselves in the New Kingdom, right? So now they have these big monumental entrances. You wouldn't have been able to see this in antiquity. Some people think they chose this area because there's kind of a pyramid, a natural one, overlooking the whole valley. But then the pharaohs themselves would have been buried underground. And even with this, right, many of the tombs were looted in antiquity. Almost all of them were looted in antiquity, except for King Tut's. And so Howard Carter over here, he goes in there in 1922, November of 1922, and he breaks one of the seals, and he's able to make his way into the antechamber here. And the question, of course, is like, what do you see? And he says, wonderful things. And you can just imagine, right? A bunch of these tombs were known. They'd all been looted. And that feeling of excitement when you break the seal, just hoping you found one that hasn't been. And then you see it completely full of all these golden objects. And this is, he was a relatively short-lived king, right? He was important because he moved things back towards traditional religion, but he only ruled for like 9 years. We have his body. He was pretty sick in terms of like just his physical health. He had like a club foot, and that's partially because there was a lot of intermarriage between the royal family, right? So there's a lot of incest going on there. But you can see Howard Carter in the coffin here, in the innermost coffin, in one of the gold burial masks. And again, he's important archaeologically because this is the only unlooted royal tomb found in the Valley of the Kings there. Okay, so Ramses II, he basically exemplifies one of the peaks of Egypt as empire, right? And that's kind of bringing our story full circle to the Battle of Kadesh from last week. And so it's Ramses II, he rules for 66 years, who pushes back up north. You can see Kadesh on the map up here, and that's where he runs in to the Hittite king Muwatalli, and they end up fighting that chariot battle, which again sort of seems to end in a draw when neither side can basically push the other one out of the region. So the Battle of Kadesh is in like 1275, 1274 BCE, and it's shortly after that we get the decline and fall of New Kingdom Egypt. So we're going to talk kind of maybe very briefly about, we'll decide whether we go into it in more depth in the future. For today, the important thing here is that we seem to get another set of outside invaders. And this time, it's what the Egyptians call the Sea Peoples. And there's this diverse group of different kind of naval marauders coming into ancient Egypt. And it's the descendant of Ramses. It's actually Ramses III who fights them off. And he says he destroyed all these people and they kind of tried to attack Egypt, but he just threw them out, no big deal. But it's very shortly after that Egypt descends into the Third Intermediate Period. And it's never really able to get the same level of kind of centralized power that it had before. Now, the Sea Peoples are important, as we're going to see a week from today, because they're also an explanation for what happens in other parts of the Mediterranean at the end of the Bronze Age. And we'll see some of the problems with that later on. Now, for the rest of today, don't feel the need to write any of this stuff down. We're just going to go through it very, very quickly. What ends up happening is that the Third Intermediate Period brings together people from all different areas, right? These are all different ethnic groups ruling small little areas of the Egyptian Delta. The Nubians come up from the south. They love Egyptian culture, right? So they take the idea of the pyramids and they start bringing it back to Nubia and building their own pyramids there. They portray themselves like Egyptians, and they justify their invasion based on wanting to reinstitute Amun as well. Egyptians take back over for a little bit, but it doesn't last. We get the Persian Empire coming in. We get Cambyses. He has his army hold cats because he had heard that cats were sacred in Egypt. And he's like throwing them over the wall. And it actually kind of works. He is able to take the country without a big bloody battle because they don't want to fight the embodiment of one of their goddesses. And then again, Egypt comes back into power for a while. We can see kind of the last fluorescence of Egypt right around 400 BC. And then it's a Greek guy, right? A Greek guy who comes in and kicks out the second group of Persians there by the name of Alexander the Great, who takes Egypt in 332. He marches his army out to the western desert, to the Temple of Amun, the Oracle of Amun, And he says there that it was Amun who proclaims him the son of a god. So we're going to hear a ton about Alexander later in the course. Stay tuned for that. That is it for right now. What I would like you guys to do is start reading these Linear B tablets for Friday. Get ready for Friday's writing assignment. And I will see you guys back here on Wednesday. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the Bronze Age in the Greek part of the Mediterranean then. All right, have a wonderful couple days, everyone. I'll see you later.